The giving of the Torah, the law, to the people of Israel is central to the identity of the people of God during their transition from life in Egypt to their potential life in Canaan. Under God's covenant, freedom came with responsibilities. Understanding this context for the giving of the law within the biblical narrative is key to allowing us to be more sensitive to the various regulations prescribed within the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and elsewhere. Listen as Cheryl Anderson guides us through each of the 10 Commandments and helps us understand how they should be viewed within this context. And listen in particular for the implications of these fundamental commandments for our own day and time.
In the first chapters of the book of Exodus, the Israelites are slaves in Egypt and have cried out in misery. God has observed their misery and commissions Moses to lead the people out of Egypt and out of their oppressive conditions. God's work here involves not just taking them away from negative conditions, it also involves moving them toward positive conditions, toward the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey. The journey from slavery in Egypt to freedom in the promised land does not occur overnight. There is a transitional period, time in the wilderness, and it is in this wilderness setting that God sends the law. That law is found in the Torah, a collective term for the first 5 books of the Bible. The Torah, along with 2 other sections, the prophets and the writings, constitute the Hebrew Scripture. The Torah is referred to as the law with a capital L. However, it should not be equated with the various laws found there, since the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy contain more than just specific laws. These 5 books contain powerful narratives, and the particular laws are set within the context of those narratives. Consequently, it's best to think of the Torah as a body of instruction outlining God's relationship with God's people through both its narratives and its laws. In fact, the narratives tell us why we should follow the laws. In Exodus chapter 19, we're told that just before giving the laws, God tells Moses to say these words to the Israelites. "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation." Clearly, the laws are given as an essential element of the covenantal relationship between God and the people of God. Furthermore, according to the biblical story, God sends the laws after the Exodus. Obedience to God's law, then, is the people's response to God's miraculous and gracious deliverance on their behalf. When disparaging remarks about legalism are heard today, keep in mind that the law is an act of God's self-revelation, providing a way for the community of faith to know God and remain close to God. striving to be the priestly kingdom and a holy nation that God would have them become, is what it means for the Israelites to live up to their covenantal responsibility. From this perspective, the Torah shapes their identity as the people of God. Within the Torah are three major law collections: the Book of the Covenant, found in Exodus, the Holiness Code, found in Leviticus, and the Deuteronomic Law, found in Deuteronomy. However, according to the biblical narrative, the 10 Commandments, also known as the Decalogue, are given before these other laws. Rather than being the kind of law used in a judicial system, the Decalogue offers policy statements or general principles concerning the requirements of an existence in relationship with God. We are so familiar with these brief statements that we assume we know what they mean. We may know the letter of the law, but do we understand the spirit of the law, the underlying rationale for the law? On closer examination, we might find that the 10 Commandments can be applied more broadly in today's world than we ordinarily think. For instance, the first commandment against having other gods means having an exclusive relationship with the God of the Exodus. But the spirit of the law further challenges the faithful to not have any other priorities, such as earning more money or any allegiances to groups or communities that take precedence over their commitment to God. The second commandment's prohibition against creating idols has been interpreted to mean having no physical representations of God. But more fundamentally, this commandment asserts that God cannot be a human creation. We cannot write up a list of divine attributes or qualities, no matter how long it might be, and feel that we have arrived at the totality of God's existence. We have to respect the ultimate mystery of the divine nature. The intent of the commandment against taking the Lord's name in vain seems to be the banning of profanity. More accurately, though, as the verse is translated in the New Revised Standard Version, it is a prohibition against the wrongful use of the Lord's name. So the third commandment forbids claiming God's name and power for our own selfish purposes. The commandment to remember or keep the Sabbath calls to mind God's own pattern of activity and rest in creation, and emphasizes the need for balance in daily life. We need to work, but our lives must be more than endless ambition and productivity. We should make time to nurture relationships with God and with those around us. And as the fifth commandment tells us, one of the most important relationships to nurture is the one with our parents. Traditionally, we think of biological parents as those who should be honored, but today, blended, adoptive, and extended families should be included as well. The spirit of this commandment, however, would have us treat with dignity and respect, not just the elders in our own families, but all of those in our societies who are no longer part of the workforce. The commandment against killing is absolute in form, but not in practice, because the taking of human life through war and capital punishment does occur in the Torah. Consequently, there remains a degree of ambiguity about the interpretation of the sixth commandment in today's context. At the very least, this prohibition means that human life is precious and should never be taken lightly or without serious reflection and deliberation. Furthermore, this commandment would have us go beyond physical violence and recognize the harm that anger and verbal abuse cause another person, as Jesus does when he refers to this commandment in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 26. From that perspective, upholding the sixth commandment would have us limit attitudes and behaviors that kill the human spirit, even in the absence of any physical harm. In their ancient setting, the laws against adultery applied only to a married woman and not to a married man. In other words, a married man did not commit adultery if he had intercourse with a woman who was single. Adultery occurred only if he had intercourse with a married woman. Today, these laws are reinterpreted in the community of faith, and their application is extended to cover both married men and women. As a result, the seventh commandment emphasizes mutual responsibility, faithfulness, and commitment within relationships. The commandment against stealing is usually thought to prohibit the taking of another's property. However, its purview is so broad as to prohibit kidnapping a person too. Consequently, the spirit of the eighth commandment condemns depriving others of their property or of their ability to live their own lives to the best of their abilities. According to the ninth commandment, bearing false witness, telling a lie in judicial proceedings, undermines the integrity of a community's institutions. Indeed, telling the truth is so important to the life of a community that underscoring the need for the truth in all areas of one's life is a reasonable extension of the commandment. Finally, the commandment against coveting is usually thought to cover the things that another person possesses. But the harm caused by coveting one's tangible assets is also seen when another's intangible qualities, such as fame or prestige, are coveted. In fact, coveting is a damaging emotion precisely because it can lead to lying, stealing, cheating, and even killing, all of which are prohibited in the Ten Commandments, and examples of which are found in the narratives of the Torah. According to the Jewish rabbinical tradition, there are 613 laws in the Torah. The Decalogue is only a small percentage of that total number. Nevertheless, the significance of the Ten Commandments should not be underestimated. Their basic precepts are repeated in the Covenant Code, the Deuteronomic Law, and the Holiness Code that follow. In fact, many of the laws found in these subsequent codes can be thought of as the specific regulations that carry out the general principles set forth in the Ten Commandments. Because the Torah contains so many laws, though, we need to consider an important question. How many of these laws apply to us today? For example, we might agree that the laws concerning sexual ethics are still valid, but what about the laws concerning business ethics? Are we as sure about the validity of the Deuteronomic law that prohibits the charging of interest on loans to a member of the community? Similarly, should we observe the law concerning the Jubilee year in Leviticus, when debts are forgiven, debt slaves are set free, and their ancestral lands are returned to them? In today's context, observing the law of the Jubilee might mean that the international debt of developing nations is forgiven, or that family farms lost through foreclosure should be returned. These laws in the Torah were given before the Israelites entered the Promised Land, and that fact is important to remember. Once they had been slaves, now they were free. But with freedom came responsibilities under God's covenant, and the requirement to act in certain ways before God and with families and neighbors alike. The very presence of these laws reminds us now that to be a person of faith is not just a matter of what we believe, it is also a matter of how we behave.